November 17th, 1944, 3:47 in the morning. Peleliu Island. Private First Class Robert Sullivan pressed his back against jagged coral, feeling the rock bite through his utilities. 22 years old, Boston Irish, 3 months in combat. The M1 Garand in his hands felt useless, slick with sweat and salt water that never dried in the Pacific heat. 3 hours pinned down. 3 hours listening to Sergeant Eddie Miller die 12 feet to his left. Sullivan counted Miller's breaths. Had been counting for the last 40 minutes. 23, 24, 25. Then silence. 8 seconds of nothing. Then another breath weaker than before. The sergeant from Houston was running out of time. Miller had a gut wound. The medical manuals said 90 minutes maximum survival without surgery. But Miller was Texas tough, and apparently Texans died slower than the manuals predicted. 2 hours and 47 minutes now. Still breathing, still bleeding, still dying. 75 yards upslope, a Japanese Type 92 machine gun spoke in 3-round bursts, patient, methodical. The gunner knew the Americans couldn't advance across the exposed coral field behind them, couldn't retreat either. Just had to wait and die. Sullivan's platoon had fired 340 rounds at that cave position. He'd counted every one. Numbers helped him think. Numbers made sense when nothing else did. Every bullet sparked against limestone or disappeared into darkness. Accomplished nothing except waste ammunition and announce their exact position. Lieutenant Jack Morrison, West Point, class of 1942, was on the radio for the third time that night. His voice stayed level professional, but Sullivan heard the edge underneath. Badger 6, this is Charlie 16. Request flamethrower support grid 847-293. We have enemy cave position, 8 wounded, 1 critical. Request immediate support. Static, then the response that Sullivan had learned to dread. Charlie 16 negative. All flame units engaged elsewhere. Earliest ETA dawn, 0600 hours. Morrison set the handset down carefully. Too carefully. Officers weren't supposed to show frustration, but Sullivan saw his hands shake. Dawn was 4 hours away. Miller didn't have 4 hours. Sullivan pulled out his small notebook, the one he'd carried since Boston Navy Yard, where he'd worked quality control before the war. His father, Michael Sullivan, master welder, had taught him to document everything. Measurements mattered. Details mattered. 1/16 of an inch difference meant a weld failed. His father had also told him he wasn't a fighter. That war didn't need thinkers. It needed people willing to die. Bobby Sullivan had believed that, still believed it mostly. He wasn't the best shot in the platoon, wasn't the fastest or strongest, just average in every way that mattered in combat. Except one thing, he paid attention. He noticed patterns, he wrote things down. In his notebook pages filled with observations from 2 months on Peleliu. Casualty rates, ammunition expenditure, time delays for support assets, the mathematics of men dying. One entry stood out, written 5 days ago in handwriting that still shook. Danny Foster burned alive because Japanese can see flamethrower operators from 200 yards. We need better solution. Danny Foster, 19 years old, Kansas farm boy, volunteered for flamethrower duty because someone had to do it. Sullivan had watched Foster approach a cave position on Ridge 200, carrying 65 pounds of fuel tanks on his back, looking like a walking bomb, because that's exactly what he was. The Japanese sniper had known it too. One shot, right fuel tank. Not center mass, which would have been mercy. The bullet punctured the tank, sprayed fuel, created spark. Foster became a torch. 40 seconds of burning. 40 seconds of screaming that echoed across the ridge and inside Sullivan's skull, where it would live forever. The corpsman couldn't reach him. Still in the kill zone. Marines watched Foster die. Some cried. Sullivan vomited. Then wrote in his notebook, trying to turn horror into data, trying to make it mean something. Now Miller was dying the slow way instead of the fast way, and Sullivan's notebook couldn't solve that problem either. The Type 92 fired another burst. Rounds sparked off coral 10 yards away. The gunner was toying with them. Had all night. Had all the ammunition in the world. Americans were trapped. Then Corporal Frank Hayes appeared. Sullivan saw movement in his peripheral vision. Impossibly fast crawl through the kill zone where 3 Marines had already died trying to cross. Hayes moved like he knew exactly where the machine gun's dead angles were, like he'd studied the field of fire and calculated the one path through. He slid into Sullivan's position, barely breathing hard. 24 years old, Georgia accent, welding background, like Sullivan's father. Hayes had been assigned to them 2 days ago, some kind of special weapons detachment. Carried an M1 Garand that looked normal until you looked close. Metal tube beneath the barrel. Canvas straps connecting to a small cylinder on his lower back. The whole rig added maybe 8 pounds to the standard rifle. Nothing like the massive fuel tanks of the M2 Flamethrower. Morrison crawled over, moving carefully to stay below the coral lip. "Hayes, what are you doing here? Where's your squad?" "Got detached, sir. Special assignment." Hayes checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Heard you boys had cave problems." Morrison stared at the modified rifle. "What is that?" "Officially M1E1, auxiliary flame projector." Hayes's Georgia drawl made technical terminology sound casual. "We just call it other things." "That's a flamethrower." "Sort of. 8 pounds instead of 65. Doesn't make me look like a target. Range about 45 yards. 3 bursts. 2 seconds each." Hayes adjusted position, checked sight lines to the cave. "Your cave, 75 yards." "Yes." "Good range. You want to see how this works?" Morrison hesitated. West Point had taught him artillery and combined arms and proper coordination of support assets. Nothing about rifle-mounted flame projectors that appeared out of nowhere at 4 in the morning. But Miller was dying and doctrine wasn't saving him. "Show me," Morrison said. Hayes flipped a small selector switch on the M1's receiver. From standard to flame. Simple toggle, easy to miss if you didn't know to look for it. That was the whole point, Sullivan realized. This weapon was designed to be invisible until the moment it fired. Hayes aimed at the cave entrance 75 yards upslope. Controlled breathing, marksman fundamentals. Squeeze the trigger. First came the hiss. Compressed air releasing from the small cartridge in Hayes's weapon system. Loud in the pre-dawn quiet, Sullivan flinched. Then the fire. Not a cone like the M2 Flamethrower. Not a wide spray. A focused stream, tight and precise like a dragon breathing, concentrated flame. The fuel ignited as it left the nozzle, created a burning lance that crossed 75 yards in just over a second. Sullivan counted. Professional bias at 1.2 seconds from trigger pull to impact. The flame stream hit the cave entrance, dead center, disappeared inside. For half a second, nothing happened. Then orange light bloomed from within the cave. Grew brighter, red, white, temperature spiking as fuel ignited and spread and consumed oxygen. Screaming started. Japanese voices, high-pitched, panic. The Type 92 fired a wild burst round, spraying randomly out of the cave mouth. Nowhere useful. The gunner was firing blind. Hayes calmly fired a second burst. Another 2 seconds. Another stream of flame into the cave. The screaming stopped. Silence except for crackling fire and the sound of limestone cracking from thermal stress. Sharp reports like ice breaking, but from heat instead of cold. 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit turning solid rock into something that wanted to shatter. Total engagement time from first trigger, pull to silence 8 seconds. Sullivan stared. His brain tried to process what he'd just witnessed. 3 hours pinned down. 340 rounds wasted. Miller bleeding out. And this corporal from Georgia with a modified rifle solved the problem in 8 seconds. Morrison stared too, then found his voice. "Where did you get that weapon?" Hayes ejected the spent compressed air cartridge, loaded a fresh one from his belt pouch. Small cylinder size of a CO2 cartridge for a pellet gun. Arrived Pearl Harbor November 12th. Distributed to combat units November 15th. We got 300 for Palelio operations. Classified field testing. Why didn't command tell us about this? Wanted to see if it worked before wide rollout. Verify effectiveness in actual combat conditions. Hayes checked his fuel gauge. "I'm guessing it works." Sullivan looked across the ridgeline. Pre-dawn twilight was turning the sky from black to gray. He could see smoke rising from other positions. 7 distinct columns. 8, 9. All the same color as the smoke drifting from the cave Hayes had just hit. "How many Dragon rifles are out there right now?" Sullivan asked. Hayes smiled at the nickname. "Tonight, maybe 40 or 50 on Palelio. By next week, they're shipping 1,700 more units from the States. Every Marine battalion in the Pacific gets them." The implications hit Sullivan like physical force. If Japanese defenders couldn't identify which Marines carried flame capability, they couldn't prioritize targets. The M2 flamethrower operator was obvious from 200 yards away. Two big fuel tanks, distinctive silhouette, priority target. But this looked like a standard rifleman until the moment fire erupted. No warning, no way to prepare. Every Marine potentially carried dragon fire. Jesus, Sullivan whispered. This changes everything. Yes, sir, it does. Hayes gestured toward the cave. Want to check results? Should be cool enough to approach in about 5 minutes. Morrison nodded slowly. West Point hadn't prepared him for this. But West Point also hadn't prepared him for writing 11 condolence letters in 8 weeks, for watching boys burn, for waiting 4 hours for support that never came. Sometimes you had to improvise. They waited 5 minutes. Sullivan counted every second. 300 counts. Old habit from Navy Yard Quality Control. Measure twice, act once. Morrison entered the cave first. Flashlight, pistol drawn, professional caution. Sullivan followed Hayes last relaxed like they were inspecting a training facility. The cave extended 35 feet back, widened into a chamber about 15 by 20. 3 Japanese soldiers lay dead. Not burned exactly. Smoke inhalation. Their bodies were in position suggesting they tried to reach the rear exit but collapsed before making it. The Type 92 machine gun sat on its mount barrel warped from heat. Ammunition had cooked off. Spent casings everywhere. The brass had been hot enough to leave scorch marks on the limestone floor. Sullivan touched the wall, still warm, not burning but warm enough to be uncomfortable. The fuel had adhered to surfaces burned for 8 to 12 seconds before exhausting itself, long enough to superheat the enclosed space, long enough to consume all available oxygen, long enough to create smoke and carbon monoxide and other gases that killed faster than flame. Morrison examined the bodies with professional detachment. Smoke inhalation mostly. Yes, sir, Hayes confirmed. Dragon rifle doesn't throw as much fuel volume as the M2, but in confined spaces like caves it doesn't need to. Smoke does the work. Temperature spikes fast. Oxygen disappears. Anyone sealed inside doesn't have good options. Sullivan wrote in his notebook, weapon effectiveness from oxygen displacement and toxic gas generation in enclosed spaces. More efficient than burning. Also more cruel or more humane depending on how you calculated mercy in combat. They returned to the position, checked on Miller. The sergeant's eyes were open, focused on Hayes and the dragon rifle with dying curiosity. What the hell was that? Miller's voice was barely audible. Hayes knelt beside him. New weapon, Sarge. Rifle-mounted flamethrower. Just cleared your cave problem. Miller smiled, blood on his teeth. Took you boys long enough. The corpsman arrived 30 seconds later. Hospital man second-class Robert Chen Navy medic assigned to Charlie Company. He'd been delayed by the same cave position that Hayes just neutralized. Couldn't reach the wounded through the kill zone. Chen examined Miller's wound and his expression told Sullivan everything. The corpsman didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Miller knew too. 2 hours and 47 minutes was good time for a gut wound. But time was up. Morrison, Miller whispered. I'm here, Ed. Tell Sarah. Tell my wife. Long pause, breathing wet and labored Ed. Tell her I didn't die alone in a cave like Foster. Tell her the boys got me out. Tell her there was a new weapon. Tell her it'll save other boys. Miller looked at Hayes, focused with effort. You save other boys with that thing. Yes, Sergeant. Good. Miller's voice fading. Good. Sergeant Eddie Miller, 28 years old. Houston, Texas, died at 4:31 in the morning. Morrison wrote the time in his log with steady hands. Officers didn't cry in front of enlisted men, but Morrison's hands shook anyway. Sullivan wrote in his notebook, Miller's last words were about saving other Marines, not about himself, not about pain or fear or going home, about other boys who might not have to die waiting for support. That's what leadership looked like. Sullivan also wrote, Dragon Rifle got here 29 minutes too late for Miller. How many other sergeants died waiting for a solution that already existed but wasn't distributed yet? The sun rose over Peleliu at 6:23 in the morning. Sullivan sat on coral outcropping, watching light spread across the island. Black volcanic sand on the beaches, jungle burnt to skeleton trees, ridgelines torn apart by naval bombardment but still full of caves. Still full of Japanese willing to die slowly rather than surrender. This was day 63 of what was supposed to be a 4-day operation. Intelligence had promised light resistance. Intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. Sullivan opened his notebook to a fresh page, started tracking every Dragon rifle engagement he could document through radio traffic and direct observation. 8:15 hours, Ridge 140 bunker complex, Hayes plus 2 other operators, 6 bursts total, 4 minutes from approach to all clear, 0 friendly casualties, estimated 6 to 8 enemy killed, 10:47 hours. Hill 100 cave entrance, single operator, Private First Class Mike Anderson, 2 bursts, 2 minutes, 0 friendly casualties, 3 enemy confirmed, 14:30 hours. Reinforced pillbox on supply route, 3 operators coordinating fire, 9 bursts total, 90 seconds, 0 friendly casualties, 4 enemy killed. Enemy tried to evacuate through rear exit, but Marines were positioned to cover multiple angles. No escape, 1800 hours, Bloody Nose Ridge tunnel system, 5 operators, 15 bursts over 20 minutes. Complex had multiple chambers, required methodical clearing. 2 friendly wounded from bullet wounds during approach, not from flame. Estimated 15 to 20 enemy casualties. By sunset, Sullivan had documented 14 fortified positions cleared using Dragon rifles. 40 bursts of flame total. 3 Marines wounded. 0 killed. Previous week, using conventional methods, Charlie Company averaged 6 positions cleared per day with 12 casualties per day. New methods showed 233% increase in effectiveness with 75% reduction in casualties. Sullivan showed his notes to Morrison. The lieutenant read in silence. Didn't comment. But at 19:30 hours, Morrison sent a radio message to battalion request, all available, M1, E1 units immediate deployment. Stop weapon system, tactically decisive stop. Priority urgent, stop Morrison. That night, Morrison wrote another condolence letter. 11th in 8 weeks, to Mrs. Sarah Miller, Houston, Texas, he started. Dear Mrs. Miller, it is my duty to inform you. Stopped. Crossed out duty. Started again. Your husband Eddie died in service to his country. Stopped. How do you tell a woman her husband bled out over 3 hours waiting for support that came 30 minutes too late? Morrison crumpled the letter. Stared at his hands. West Point ring on his left finger. Gift from his father, a colonel, a World War I veteran who believed in artillery doctrine and tactics manuals. The tactics manuals didn't have a chapter on what to do when all the doctrine in the world couldn't save your men. Sullivan sat 10 feet away, watching Morrison break. Rare thing to see an officer crack, but they were all cracking in small ways, little fractures that would widen later when they had time to think about what they'd done and seen and survived. Something fundamental had changed on November 17th, not just tactically, something deeper. The mathematics of infantry combat had shifted. Hayes found Sullivan later that night, sat down without asking, started cleaning his Dragon rifle by moonlight. Maintenance ritual Sullivan would learn soon enough. Morrison says, "You're getting one," Hayes said. Statement, not question. Sullivan stopped cleaning his M1. What Dragon rifle? New doctrine. 1 per fire team. You're the most experienced private in your team. Hayes worked carbon buildup out of the projection nozzle with careful precision. Congratulations. Sullivan looked at his Garand, standard infantry rifle, 9.5 pounds, 8-round end-block clip, reliable, simple. Didn't require him to burn people alive. Tomorrow it would have an additional 8 pounds, additional 48 ounces of fuel, additional capability to solve problems with fire. I don't know if I can, Sullivan started. Hayes didn't look up from cleaning. You remember Foster? Sullivan nodded, couldn't speak. Still heard Foster screaming. Miller, another nod. You want to carry their guilt, knowing you could have saved them if you had the right tool, or you want to carry 8 extra pounds? Sullivan didn't answer immediately. Opened his notebook, stared at pages of data, numbers, observations, calculations about men dying. His father's voice in memory, "You're not a fighter, Bobby. You're a thinker." War doesn't need thinkers. It needs people willing to die. But maybe his father was wrong. Maybe war needed both. Needed people who could think precisely and act decisively. Needed people who could use terrible tools carefully. People like Sullivan. He wrote in his notebook, November 18th, 1944, Dragon Rifle Training begins. Operator, PFC Robert Sullivan. Hayes saw the entry, smiled. 0800 hours tomorrow. Bring your Garand and an open mind. That's all you need. Hayes, Sullivan's voice quiet. The screaming from the cave. Japanese soldiers burning. Does it get easier? Hayes stopped cleaning. Long silence. 3 waves crashed on distant beach before he answered. No, it doesn't get easier. You learn to live with it. You remember why you're doing it. Hayes gestured toward the ridge where Miller had died. You remember who you're saving. Hayes stood. But Sullivan, if it ever does get easy, if you start to enjoy it, tell Morrison immediately. Get yourself transferred. Because that's when you stop being a soldier and become something worse. Hayes walked away. Sullivan alone with notebook and rifle and stars. He wrote one more line before trying to sleep. Father said, I'm not a fighter. Maybe he's right. But I can be the tool that helps fighters survive. Across the ridge, smoke still drifted from caves where dragon rifles had burned. The smell would linger for days, sweet and toxic. The smell of innovation and necessity and horror combined. War would never be the same. Neither would Robert Sullivan. November 18th, 1944, 8 o'clock in the morning. Peleliu Makeshift Training Range. 12 Marines stood in a rough line on volcanic sand, each holding a standard M1 Garand. Corporal Frank Hayes walked the line, Georgia accent cutting through humid air, making technical instruction sound like common sense. This isn't complicated, Hayes began. You already know 90% of what you need. It's an M1 Garand. You've fired 10,000 rounds through a Garand. This just adds one more capability. Robert Sullivan stood third from the left, notebook in his cargo pocket, hands steady on his rifle. 22 years old, but feeling older. 3 months of combat aged you in ways that had nothing to do with calendar time. Hayes laid components on a makeshift table constructed from ammunition crates. The morning sun made everything look washed out, overexposed, like a photograph taken with too much light. 4 main parts, Hayes said. Projection nozzle, 4 inches of steel tube mounted parallel to your barrel. Internal diameter 0.35 inches. Precision machined to create focused stream instead of wide spray. This is critical. We're not throwing a cone of flame. We're shooting a stream that travels tight out to 45 yards, then disperses into fireball at maximum range. He held up the second component. Fuel reservoir, 48 ounces, aluminum cylinder, canvas harness. Sits on your lower back below your cartridge belt. 8 pounds when full. Compare that to your rifle at 9.5 pounds. So you're carrying the equivalent weight of 2 rifles. Heavy but manageable. Sullivan calculated automatically. 8 pounds distributed across back and shoulders versus 65 pounds of the M2 Flamethrower concentrated on the spine. That was an 87% weight reduction. The mathematics of lethality measured in pounds and ounces. Hayes continued. Trigger mechanism, modified gas valve, selector switch right here on the receiver. Standard or flame. Standard position, your Garand functions normally. Fires 30-06 rounds from an 8-round clip. Flame position, pulling the trigger activates compressed air cartridge instead of firing pin. He held up something the size of a CO2 cartridge. Compressed air. Each cartridge gives you 3 2-second bursts. After 3 bursts, cartridge is exhausted. Takes 15 seconds to swap in a new one. You carry 6 spares in this dedicated pouch. That's 18 total flame bursts before you need resupply. Hayes' voice dropped lower, more serious. 3 ways to kill yourself with this weapon. Pay attention. 1, shoot flame into wind. Blowback can hit you. Always check wind direction before firing. 2, shoot with damaged nozzle. Can burst under pressure. Always inspect nozzle before loading fuel. 3, store in direct sunlight with fuel loaded. Heat expands, fuel can rupture cylinder. Always store in shade or remove cylinder. He looked at each Marine individually, making sure they understood this wasn't theoretical. Anyone violates these rules gets dragon rifle taken away and assigned to digging latrines for the rest of deployment. Clear, Corporal. Hayes smiled. Good. Now let's burn something. The firing line was 200 yards from the nearest friendly position. Downrange, Hayes and other Dragon rifle operators had constructed mock bunkers from coral blocks and sandbags. Targets at 30, 35, 40, and 45 yards. First burst always feels strange, Hayes warned. Different recoil than rifle. More push than kick. Stream travels slower than bullet, so lead time is different. You'll feel it. You'll adjust. Sullivan stepped to the firing line. Dragon rifle attached to his M1 felt wrong. The balance was off. Nose heavy. The fuel cylinder on his back pulled at the canvas straps with every movement. Mock bunker at 35 yards. Rectangular opening representing a cave entrance. Sullivan flipped the selector switch from standard to flame. Felt the click. Aimed using standard iron sights. Controlled breathing. Marksman fundamentals still applied even when the projectile was fire instead of lead. He squeezed the trigger. The hiss came first. Compressed air releasing. Louder than Sullivan expected, made him flinch slightly, which annoyed him. Professional operators don't flinch. Then the whoosh, fuel igniting, creating a stream that looked impossibly slow compared to bullets. Sullivan's brain tried to calculate velocity. Maybe 40 feet per second at the nozzle. Gravity and air resistance would slow it further. The stream, arced slightly, dropped maybe 6 inches over 35 yards. Travel time 1.1 seconds from trigger pull to impact. Sullivan counted automatically. An eternity compared to bullets that crossed the same distance in a tenth of that time. The fuel hit the mock bunker entrance, splashed across the opening, ignited surfaces, burned with orange flames and black smoke. The smell hit 3 seconds later. Gasoline and diesel mixed with something else. The thickening agent that made the fuel sticky, made it adhere to surfaces instead of running off, made it burn longer. Sullivan gagged slightly, covered it. Professional operators don't vomit during training. Hayes appeared beside him. Good shot, dead center at 35 yards. Natural talent for this. Sullivan didn't feel talented, felt nauseous. The smell was worse than he'd expected. Sweet and chemical and wrong. You're a thinker, Hayes continued. I can tell. You calculated trajectory before you even pulled the trigger, didn't you? Sullivan nodded. Use that. You're not an instinct shooter. You're precision. Calculate aim fire. Treat it like quality control work. Measure twice, shoot once. The comparison to Navy Yard work hit harder than Hayes probably intended. Sullivan's father measured weld strength by the 16th of an inch. Now Sullivan measured lethality by the ounce of fuel and the yard of range. Different precision. Same fundamental principle. By 1,100 hours, Sullivan had fired 18 practice bursts, 6 at each range from 30 to 45 yards. His aim improved with each shot. Muscle memory building. Brain learning to compensate for fuel trajectory, drop, and wind drift. Hayes gathered the 12 trainees. Tactical employment. 3 principles. First fire in short bursts, 2 seconds each. Don't hold the trigger trying to increase effect. Just waste fuel. Short controlled bursts are more accurate and fuel efficient. He held up 2 fingers. Second, aim for maximum effect. Cave entrances, bunker firing ports, trench sections. Don't spray randomly. Pick targets that matter. 3 fingers. Third, you're still a rifleman first. Dragon rifle is a tool for specific situations. Don't neglect rifle training. Don't forget you're carrying 8 rounds of 30-06 that can save your life when flame isn't appropriate. Hayes paused, looked at each Marine again. One more thing. Unofficial. Personal. The casual tone dropped away. What remained was harder. More honest. You're going to kill people by burning them alive. It's horrible. You'll hear screaming. You'll smell flesh burning. And yes, you'll learn to recognize that smell as distinct from fuel burning. You'll remember it forever. Silence. 12 Marines processing what they'd volunteered for. If anyone here thinks they'll enjoy this, speak up now. I'll have you transferred immediately. No shame, no questions asked. More silence. Private First Class Mike Anderson, the Marine who'd operated Dragon Rifle on Hill 100, raised his hand. Corporal, how do you live with it? The sounds. Hayes's answer came without hesitation. You remember who you're saving. You remember Foster and Miller and all the boys who died waiting for flamethrower support that never came. You remember that every cave you clear fast means Marines don't get pinned down. You remember that hesitation kills your friends. He looked at the volcanic sand under their boots. And at night, when you can't sleep, you write letters home. You help the corpsman with wounded. You do anything that reminds you you're still human. Hayes met Anderson's eyes. But you do the job, because someone has to. The training concluded at noon. Hayes evaluated each operator. Aim test, fuel change speed, emergency procedures, tactical decision-making. Sullivan qualified on all metrics. Hayes wrote in his evaluation log, Sullivan overthinks, which is usually a weakness. But with Dragon Rifle, it's a strength. He'll calculate, precisely shoot, carefully waste minimal fuel. Recommend approval for combat operations. Sullivan wrote in his own notebook, qualified Dragon Rifle operator. November 18th, 1944. God help me. That night, Sullivan couldn't sleep. Lay in his foxhole watching stars that looked the same as Boston stars but existed in a completely different sky. A sky where young men learned to burn other young men alive with technical precision. Hospital man second class Robert Chen crawled into Sullivan's position without asking. The Navy corpsman had treated 43 burn casualties since Peleliu started. Knew something about fire and its effects on human bodies. Can't sleep either, Chen asked. Sullivan shook his head. Chen silent for a moment. Then, I've treated 43 American burn casualties since we landed here, mostly from Japanese flamethrowers and incendiary weapons. You know what they all say? Sullivan waited. Don't let me die like this. Shoot me if you have to. Just don't let me burn. Chen adjusted position, found more comfortable angle against the foxhole wall. Fire is the worst way to and the worst way to kill, but those 43 casualties would have been over 200 without Dragon Rifles clearing positions fast. I know because I saw casualty rates before and after. Sullivan found his voice. Does that make it better, knowing we're efficient at something horrible? No, doesn't make it better, makes it bearable. There's a difference. Chen left Sullivan alone with that distinction. Better versus bearable. The moral mathematics of modern war. Sullivan wrote in his notebook, I'm getting better at burning people. That terrifies me more than being bad at it would. 300 miles northwest at Pearl Harbor Naval Station, Marine Corps Equipment Board, Captain Richard Cartwright coordinated the largest weapons distribution operation since the M1 Garand replaced the Springfield rifle. November 25, 1944. Cartwright's office overlooked the harbor where Japanese bombs had fallen 3 years earlier. Now the harbor was packed with ships heading west, carrying supplies and carrying weapons, carrying Marines toward more islands that would cost more lives. The telegram from Peleliu sat on Cartwright's desk. M1E1 field tests. Successful stop. Tactically decisive stop. Increase. Production. Maximum capacity. Stop. Priority. Urgent. Cartwright studied distribution maps. The Pacific theater stretched across distances that made European campaigns look compact. Every island was a logistics nightmare. Every weapon system needed ammunition, spare parts trained, operators maintenance support. But Dragon Rifles simplified the equation, used same fuel as M2 flamethrowers, could be operated by any trained rifleman, didn't require dedicated specialists, just needed Marines willing to carry 8 extra pounds and live with what that weight enabled. Cartwright wrote distribution orders. 1st Marine Division currently engaged Peleliu 200 additional units immediate deployment. 3rd Marine Division engaged Philippines 400 units expedited shipping. 4th Marine Division in training for Iwo Jima 380 units with accelerated training program. 5th Marine Division training for Iwo Jima 420 units with accelerated training program. New Doctrine 1, Dragon Rifle per 4-man fire team. Marine Rifle Squad contained 3 fire teams, 12 men, 3 Dragon Rifles per squad. Organic flame capability at the lowest tactical level. Revolutionary concept, not because the technology was complicated, because it wasn't, because it made specialized capability ordinary. Cartwright attached a memo to his distribution orders M1. One philosophy is distributed lethality, no longer dependent on specialized flamethrower operators who become priority targets. Every fire team possesses organic flame capability. Enemy cannot prioritize targets. Enemy cannot predict which Marines carry fire. Tactical advantage, psychological as much as physical. The orders went out November 26th. 1,700 Dragon Rifles in transit across the Pacific. enough to equip every Marine infantry battalion for the next 6 months of island warfare. But information traveled faster than weapons. Intelligence reports traveled faster than ships. December 18th, 1944. Japanese Naval Intelligence Office, Iwo Jima. Lieutenant Commander Hideaki Tanaka compiled reports from Peleliu survivors. 9 separate after-action statements, all describing the same phenomenon. Americans using rifles that breathe fire. Tanaka wrote his assessment in precise characters. American forces employ new weapon. Rifle-mounted flame projector. Japanese troops designated Ryu no Juji. Dragon rifle. He listed characteristics, appears identical to standard M1 rifle until fired. Effective range 40 to 45 meters. Projects burning liquid into fortifications. Operator indistinguishable from normal riflemen. Estimate 20 to 30% of American fire teams equipped. Tactical implications: cannot prioritize targets. Any American soldier may carry flame capability. Cave defensive doctrine compromised. Recommendations: increase ventilation in defensive positions. Multiple escape routes per position. Wet blanket barriers at cave entrances to absorb burning fuel. Assessment: this weapon represents significant threat to defensive operations. However, American production likely limited. Prepare for increased deployment in future operations. Tanaka was right about the threat, wrong about production limitations. American industrial capacity was about to demonstrate what total war manufacturing looked like. Edgewood, Arsenal, Maryland. Chemical Warfare Service, Experimental Weapons Division. Dr. Harold Jensen, 48 years old, civilian engineer, received updated production orders December 1st. Increase M1, E1 manufacturing to maximum capacity. All available resources allocated. Priority exceeds all other flame weapon programs. Jensen's team, partnering with DuPont Chemical Engineers, redesigned production lines. October had produced 200 units weekly. Prototype scale, proof of concept manufacturing. December production, 1,200 units weekly. January ramped to 1,500. February maintained that pace. Total production between November 1944 and May 1945. 6,947 Dragon rifles. Combat deployment, 4,200 units. The remainder kept for training reserves, evaluation potential, future expansion that never materialized because the war ended first. But that's getting ahead of the story. February 19th, 1945. Iwo Jima, D-Day. Robert Sullivan waded through black volcanic sand that cut through cloth and embedded in skin like glass particles because that's exactly what it was. Volcanic glass, nature's razor wire. 23 years old now. Birthday had passed unnoticed somewhere between Peleliu and this beach. 4 months since Hayes first fired a Dragon rifle into that cave. 4 months since Sullivan's life divided into before and after. The Dragon rifle attached to his M1 Garand felt heavier in amphibious assault. Salt water soaked the canvas straps. Sullivan worried about fuel cylinder seals. They'd tested for water resistance but not full immersion in Pacific saltwater. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion. 7th Marines hit Red Beach 1 at 9:02 in the morning. Intelligence had promised light resistance. Intelligence had lied with such consistency that Sullivan wondered if they did it deliberately. Set expectations low, so reality couldn't disappoint as much. 30,000 Marines landed in the first hour. Japanese defenders let them come. Let them pack the beaches. Let them think maybe this time intelligence was right. Then artillery opened fire from Mount Suribachi and the northern ridges. Mortars, machine guns. Everything the Japanese had hidden and preserved through 3 days of naval bombardment. Sullivan's squad reached a volcanic terrace 200 yards inland, pinned immediately. Japanese bunker complex above the terrace, interlocking fire lanes, no way to advance across open ground without dying. Captain Morrison, promoted after Peleliu, moved through the position with practiced calm. Sullivan, Dragon rifle up. Sullivan low-crawled forward. Black sand stuck to everything. Face hands rifle. Dragon rifle nozzle. Had to check for blockage. Clear. One less thing to worry about. Bunker 50 yards away, slightly uphill. Perfect range. Sullivan flipped selector to flame. Aimed at the firing port. Rectangular slot, 2 feet wide, 6 inches tall. Small target but achievable. First combat shot since Palelu training 3 months ago. Hayes' warning in memory. You'll hesitate. Everyone does. Push through it. Sullivan hesitated. 2 seconds that felt like 2 hours. Remembered Miller bleeding out. Remembered Foster burning. Remembered 43 burn casualties Chen had treated. Remembered the equation your hesitation cost Marine lives. Squeeze trigger. Fire stream. 50 yards. Slight arc upward due to angle. Through firing port into bunker interior. Muffled explosion. Then screaming. Japanese voices. High-pitched. Panic. The sound that would live in Sullivan's memory forever alongside Foster's screams. Different language. Same agony. Sullivan's hands shook. Not from fear, from realization. From understanding that he'd just burned people alive and he was getting better at it, and that improvement felt like damnation. Morrison's voice cut through. Good shot, Sullivan. Second burst. Make sure. Sullivan fired again. No hesitation this time. Professional execution. Quality control. Verify results. Silence from the bunker. Clear. Move up. They took the terrace. Advanced another 50 yards. Found another bunker. Sullivan burned it. Advanced another 100 yards. Found a cave entrance. Sullivan burned it. Efficient. Methodical. Horrible. Somewhere in the chaos, Corporal Hayes appeared with his fire team. They'd been assigned to different beach sector, but the fighting compressed units together like waves forcing water through narrowing channels. Hayes had his modified Dragon rifle, larger fuel cylinder, 72 ounces instead of 48, slightly longer range. He'd become the unofficial Dragon rifle master, training new operators, refining tactics, pushing the weapon's capabilities. Sullivan watched Hayes coordinate 3 operators for assault on a concrete blockhouse. The structure had survived naval bombardment. Walls 2 feet thick, steel-reinforced firing ports. Standard weapons were useless against it. Hayes positioned his operators, Private First Class Mike Anderson on the left firing port, Private First Class Tony Kowalski center, Corporal James Rodriguez right, all Dragon rifle equipped, all Hayes trained, hand signals. 3, 2, 1, fire. 3 streams of flame converged inside the blockhouse. Temperature inside that confined space spiked to estimated 2,500 degrees. Steel beams warped. Concrete cracked. Anyone inside dead in seconds. Hayes didn't celebrate, just moved to next position. War wasn't about glory, it was about problem solving. Blockhouse equals problem. Dragon rifles equal solution. Next problem ahead. By sunset on D-Day, Sullivan had fired 23 Dragon rifle bursts, cleared 11 fortified positions, estimated enemy casualties 30 to 40, friendly casualties in his immediate squad 0. The mathematics worked. That was the problem. The mathematics worked perfectly. Night of February 19th, Sullivan couldn't sleep. Volcanic sand everywhere, in his uniform, in his hair, in his lungs when he breathed. The whole island felt like it wanted to reject human presence. Chen found Sullivan again. The corpsman had that gift for finding Marines who needed someone to talk to, even if they didn't know they needed it. You did good work today, Chen said. Sullivan didn't respond. I treated 16 burn casualties, all American, all from Japanese flame weapons and incendiaries. You know how many I would have treated if we couldn't clear those positions fast. How many, man? Based on Palelu rates, somewhere between 60 and 80. Chen settled against the volcanic sand, found position that was merely uncomfortable instead of actively painful. Your precision saves lives, Sullivan. You think carefully. You aim carefully. You don't waste fuel. You don't create unnecessary suffering. I burn people alive. No, you neutralize fortified positions that would otherwise kill your friends. You do it precisely. You do it quickly. You minimize suffering for everyone involved. That's mercy in a war context. Sullivan pulled out his notebook. Wrote by moonlight, February 19th. 23 bursts, 11 positions. I'm getting better at this. Chen says that's mercy. I don't know what it is. Across Iwo Jima, in an underground command post beneath Mount Suribachi, Japanese Captain Akira Tanaka studied reports from his defensive positions. Red Beach 1-3 positions neutralized by flame weapons. Blue Beach 2, 5 positions destroyed. Yellow Beach 4 positions burned out. pattern consistent across all sectors. Tanaka marked positions on his map with red ink. Each mark represented a position that fell within minutes instead of hours. Each mark represented the difference between effective defense and systematic defeat. Americans had brought Dragon rifles in numbers that exceeded intelligence estimates. Not 20% of fire teams. More like 50%, maybe higher. Hard to tell because every American looked the same until fire erupted. Tanaka wrote in his command log, February 19, 1945, American flame doctrine has evolved from specialized weapon to standard infantry capability. Our defensive preparations inadequate, countermeasures insufficient. He paused, added personal observation. We are losing not because American soldiers are superior. We are losing because American industrial capacity can equip every infantry squad with capabilities we can barely imagine. This is the lesson of Dragon rifles. This is the lesson of total war. Tanaka would die March 14th. Position overrun. Last entry in his command log. The Dragons are too many. But Sullivan didn't know about Tanaka's log or his observations or his death. Sullivan only knew that every night he closed his eyes and heard screaming in Japanese and English, and the universal language of people dying in fire. February 26, 1945, Day 7 on Iwo Jima. Sullivan sat in a foxhole at 2 o'clock in the morning, unable to sleep, writing in his notebook by filtered moonlight. The numbers haunted him more than the memories. Days on Iwo Jima 7, Dragon rifle burst fired 47, positions neutralized 19. Estimated enemy killed 65 to 80. Sound of screaming and memory constant. Sullivan was technically excellent. Captain Morrison said so. Hayes said so. The statistics proved it. He'd become one of the most effective Dragon rifle operators in the battalion. Being good at burning people alive was not an accomplishment he'd ever wanted on his resume. He wrote, "I'm efficient at something horrible." Does efficiency make it better or worse? Chen says better. I don't know. Maybe there's no better or worse. Maybe there's just necessary, and we do necessary things and live with them afterward if we're lucky enough to survive. Sullivan never sent letters home. Tried once. Started. Dear Father, you were right, I'm not a fighter. Stopped because he realized his father was wrong. War needed people who thought precisely and acted carefully. War needed people like Sullivan who could measure death by the ounce in the yard. That realization felt worse than any wound. The operation continued. March crawled forward. Days blurred together. Cave bunker, pillbox, trench. Fire advance, verify, repeat. Sullivan's burst count climbed. 50, 60, 74, 90. March 15th, 1945. Day 25. The day everything changed again. Sullivan's platoon had advanced to the northern end of the island. Terrain here was worse than anywhere else. Volcanic rock formations creating natural fortifications. Japanese had spent months preparing defenses. Every ridge was a fortress. Every cave system connected to 3 others. Charlie Company got orders to take Hill 362A. Intelligence said light resistance. Intelligence was lying again. The hill was honeycomb. 30-plus cave positions, interconnected tunnels, multiple firing angles. Japanese had concentrated remaining forces here for last stand. Sullivan's squad approached from the west. Dragon rifle operators, Sullivan Anderson and a new replacement named Private First Class Danny Walsh, 20 years old. Chicago, trained at Camp Pendleton. This was his first major action with Dragon rifle. They made it halfway up the slope before the counterattack. Japanese infantry poured from concealed positions. Not the usual defensive fighting. Actual attack. Bayonets fixed. Officers with swords. Desperation made physical. Sullivan's squad got cut off, separated from the rest of the platoon by surging Japanese infantry. 11 Marines trapped in a depression between volcanic rock formations. Wounded accumulating. Ammunition running low. Captain Morrison's voice on the Kurdimo, Charlie 2 hold position, reinforcements coming, hold position. But holding wasn't working. Japanese kept coming, not suicidal charges, coordinated squad movements, professional infantry executing proper tactics. These weren't untrained conscripts. These were veterans who'd been saving strength for exactly this moment. Sullivan counted ammunition. 43 rounds left. He'd already burned 3 positions getting to this hill, had 1 compressed air cartridge remaining. 3 bursts, 6 seconds of fire. After that, just rifle and whatever bullets remained. Anderson was out of dragon rifle fuel entirely. Walsh had full load, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't aim properly. First combat will do that. Terror makes everything difficult. Sullivan saw the problem clearly. Japanese were flanking their position, using cave system to move unseen. Would emerge behind the trapped squad in maybe 3 minutes. When that happened, 11 Marines would die, unless someone bought them time. Sullivan checked his dragon rifle. 1 cartridge, 3 bursts. He looked at the cave entrance where Japanese kept appearing. 40 yards away. Perfect range. Anderson, Sullivan said, when I move, you suppress that ridgeline. Keep their heads down. What are you doing? Buying time. Sullivan didn't wait for argument. Low crawl toward the cave entrance. 40 yards through volcanic rock and incoming fire. Worst tactical decision he had ever made. Also the only option that kept his squad alive. Halfway there, a bullet hit the rock next to his head. Stone fragments cut his cheek. Kept crawling. 30 yards. Another bullet. This one closer. Japanese had spotted him. Were adjusting fire. 20 yards. Close enough. Sullivan flipped selector to flame. Aimed at cave mouth. Japanese infantry were using this cave as transit point. Kept emerging, firing, then falling back inside to reload and let fresh soldiers take their place. Sullivan fired his first burst into the cave during lull between groups. 2 seconds of flame. Deep into the cave system. Heard screaming. Heard chaos. The tunnel acted like flu. Fire and smoke got forced deeper into the connected caves. Affected positions Sullivan couldn't even see. Japanese infantry stopped emerging from that cave. Started evacuating from alternate exits. Sullivan tracked them. Fired second burst at different cave entrance, 50 yards left. Caught 3 soldiers exiting. They went down burning. Horrible. Effective. Necessary. Sullivan still had 1 burst remaining. Saved it. Covering fire for his own retreat. Started crawling back toward his squad. Made it 15 yards before Japanese infantry appeared from yet another hidden position. 5 soldiers, 30 yards away, raising rifles. Sullivan was dead. Knew it with perfect clarity. Wrong position, wrong time. No cover. Dragon rifle empty of fuel. Regular rifle had 8-round clip, but he'd need 5 seconds to flip selector back to standard, and those soldiers wouldn't give him 5 seconds. Then Corporal Hayes appeared. Just materialized from volcanic rock like he'd done on Peleliu. Hayes wasn't part of Charlie Company's sector. Should have been 200 yards south. But war compressed distance, and Hayes had always possessed uncanny ability to be where he was needed. Hayes fired his dragon rifle. 72-ounce cylinder meant he had fuel when Sullivan didn't. Stream of flame across 30 yards. Caught 4 of the 5 Japanese soldiers. They scattered. The survivor ran. Hayes grabbed Sullivan's harness, dragged him behind rock formation. You're either the bravest Marine I've ever seen or the dumbest, Hayes said. I'm not sure which. Sullivan coughed, volcanic dust in his lungs. My squad was dying. Now they're not. Let's keep it that way. Reinforcements arrived 5 minutes later, broke through Japanese lines, rescued Sullivan's trapped squad. 11 Marines extracted, 9 wounded but alive. 2 dead from wounds received before Sullivan's action. Captain Morrison found Sullivan after the position secured, looked at him for a long moment, then said, "That was incredibly stupid and incredibly necessary. Good work, Sullivan." That night, Morrison wrote Sullivan up for Bronze Star. Citation would read, "For heroic achievement in connection with operations against the enemy." Private First Class Sullivan repeatedly demonstrated exceptional skill and courage in neutralizing fortified enemy positions, directly contributing to his unit's success and the preservation of American lives. Sullivan would accept the medal, put it in a box, never display it, never mention it, because the citation didn't mention the screaming, didn't mention the smell, didn't mention lying awake at night calculating how many people he'd burned alive and whether that made him a hero or something else entirely. March 16th morning, Morrison found Sullivan cleaning his rifle. "I'm rotating you off dragon rifle duty," Morrison said, "assigning it to Anderson. You've done enough." "Sir, I'm the most experienced operator in the company. Taking me off Dragon Rifle reduces our effectiveness. Maybe, but effectiveness isn't the only thing that matters. Morrison pulled out his notebook. Officers kept logs too. You've cleared 63 positions since November. Estimated 300 enemy casualties. You've saved probably 100 American lives through rapid position neutralization. Morrison closed the notebook. Yesterday you did something I've never seen before. Used Dragon Rifle offensively in moving assault. Saved your squad. That's the action of someone who's mastered this weapon beyond tactical employment. You've taken it to operational art level. Morrison's voice softened slightly. That's enough, Sullivan. You don't need to carry this anymore. Someone has to carry it. Yes, but it doesn't have to be you, not anymore. Sullivan handed over his Dragon Rifle that afternoon. Gave it to Private First Class Mike Anderson, who'd been operating a second weapon in the squad. Showed Anderson the modifications Sullivan had made. Slightly bent nozzle for better aim at upward angles. Extra padding on the cylinder straps. Small adjustments that came from 5 months of experience. Don't enjoy it, Sullivan said. Sir, don't let yourself enjoy being good at this. Stay afraid of it. The fear keeps you human. Anderson took the weapon. Sullivan kept his standard M1 Garand, 8-pound rifle instead of 16-pound rifle flamethrower combination. Felt light. Felt wrong. Like he'd lost a limb. That night, Sullivan wrote in his notebook for the last time about Dragon Rifles, March 16, 1945. No longer operator. Total engagements, 137 bursts, 63 positions, estimated 300 enemy casualties. 0 friendly casualties in positions I cleared. Mission accomplished. Costs still calculating. He never wrote about Dragon Rifles again. Iwo Jima secured March 26. 36 days of combat. American casualties, 26,038 wounded, 6,821 killed. Japanese casualties, approximately 18,000 killed, 216 captured. Dragon Rifles cleared an estimated 847 fortified positions. Casualty rates in units equipped with Dragon Rifles averaged 11%. Units without averaged 19%. The mathematics proved effectiveness. The mathematics couldn't measure cost. Sullivan survived Iwo Jima, shipped to Okinawa April 1st. The island looked different. Actual vegetation. Trees that weren't burned skeletons. Almost peaceful until the fighting started. Sullivan carried standard M1 Garand, no Dragon Rifle. Anderson had that burden now. Sullivan was just rifleman. Regular infantry. No special capability. No fire. Felt like relief. Felt like cowardice. Probably both. Okinawa operation lasted 82 days, April through June. Bloodiest campaign in Pacific. American casualties, 49,151. Wounded, 12,520 killed. Japanese casualties, approximately 110,000. Killed 7,400 captured. Okinawan civilian casualties estimated 40,000 to 150,000. Dragon Rifles cleared over 2,000 fortified positions. The weapon had become standard issue. Every Marine rifle company carried them. Every squad had at least one operator. Innovation that started with 300 units on Peleliu had proliferated to over 4,000 deployed weapons. Secret field test had become standard doctrine. Sullivan watched from distance. Saw other operators burn caves and bunkers and pillboxes. Saw the efficiency. Saw the cost on operators' faces. Recognized the look. Same one he'd worn for 5 months. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. August 16th, Marine Corps Equipment Command issued orders. All M1E1 auxiliary flame projectors will be turned in immediately for storage or destruction. Operators will sign non-disclosure agreements. Discussion of weapon system remains classified, secret per War Department directive. Sullivan signed without reading carefully. Didn't matter, had no intention of talking about Dragon Rifles anyway. What would he say? I burned 300 people alive with technical precision. I became excellent at causing suffering. I saved American lives by being efficient at killing, all true. None of them things you say at Thanksgiving dinner. Robert Sullivan returned to Boston in December 1945. His father met him at the train station. Michael Sullivan, master welder, looked older. War years had aged everyone, combatants and civilians alike. They shook hands. Boston Irish didn't hug even after war. You look different, his father said. Everyone looks different after. They drove home in silence. Sullivan watched familiar streets pass. Same buildings, same neighborhoods. Everything unchanged, everything completely different. His father tried once. What did you do over there in the war? Sullivan thought about how to answer, thought about cave entrances and bunker firing ports and the smell of burning fuel and burning flesh. Thought about the screaming, always the screaming. Infantry work, Sullivan said. Standard Marine Corps duties. His father didn't push. Maybe he understood that some questions didn't have answers you could speak aloud. Sullivan got job at Charlestown Navy Yard, back in quality control, checking welds, measuring tolerances. Same work as before the war. But his hands shook sometimes. When the welding torches lit, when the orange flame appeared, when the smell of burning metal carried on the breeze. One day in February 1946, Sullivan stood at inspection station watching welder work on destroyer hull section. The torch ignited. Orange flame, that chemical smell. Sullivan's hands started shaking. The welder noticed. Older man, maybe 50. Had that look veterans recognize in each other. You all right, kid? Sullivan gripped the inspection table. Knuckles white. Fine, just cold. It's 60 degrees. Sullivan said nothing. The welder killed his torch, set it down, walked over, spoke quietly. I was in France, first war. Gas attacks, can't stand chemical smells anymore. Wife thinks I'm crazy because I won't use cleaning products. But when I smell chlorine, I'm back in trench watching boys drown on dry land. He looked at Sullivan. You don't have to tell me what you saw, but I see you seeing something when torch lights. We've all got our things, the things we can't forget. Does it get better? Sullivan asked. Not better, different. You learn to live around it, like working around bad weld. Can't fix it, but you can reinforce other areas to compensate. The welder picked up his torch. You need break, take break, no shame. Job will be here when you get back. Sullivan took break, sat outside for 20 minutes, counted to 1,000. Old habit. Numbers helped. Came back, finished his shift. Next day was easier. Not easy, just easier. That became pattern. Some days welding flames were just flames. Other days they were dragon rifle fire in cave entrances and screaming in Japanese. Sullivan learned to tell which kind of day it was, learned to take breaks on bad days, learned to live around the damage. He never married, dated a few women. Couldn't explain why he woke up screaming sometimes. Couldn't explain why he avoided barbecues and bonfires and anywhere fire existed for reasons other than industrial necessity. One woman in 1951, Sarah, worked as secretary at Navy Yard. Kind, patient, liked Sullivan despite his strangeness. They dated for 8 months. One summer evening, she invited him to beach bonfire with friends. Sullivan said yes, trying to be normal, trying to move past. The bonfire was large, driftwood stacked high, flames reaching 10 feet, people laughing, drinking beer, being young and alive and uncomplicated. Sullivan lasted 5 minutes. Smell of burning wood too close to burning fuel. Sound of crackling fire too close to screaming. Had to leave. Walked away without explanation. Sarah found him an hour later, sitting on jetty half-mile away, looking at ocean. Bobby, what's wrong? Can't do fires, sorry. Why not? Sullivan struggled for explanation that wasn't classified. War thing. Can't explain. Just can't do fires. Sarah sat beside him. Okay, we don't do fires. Plenty of other things we can do. But it wasn't just fires. It was also sudden noises, crowds, enclosed spaces sometimes. Sullivan was broken in ways he couldn't articulate and couldn't fix, and eventually Sarah realized she couldn't fix either. They broke up October 1951. Amicable, sad, inevitable. Sullivan stopped dating after that. Easier to be alone than explain wounds that had no visible scars. He kept his notebook from the war, all his measurements and calculations and observations. Kept it in a lockbox in his closet. Never looked at it, but couldn't throw it away either. The Bronze Star went in the same box, the citation that praised his heroic achievement, the medal that recognized effectiveness at something horrible. Sullivan lived quietly, worked 34 years at the Navy Yard, became senior quality control inspector. Good at his job, precise, thorough, fair. Men respected him even if they didn't know him. He had few friends, mostly kept to himself, lived in small apartment in Charlestown, read books, listened to radio, then television, followed Red Sox, normal life except for the parts that weren't normal. Sometimes he saw news about Pacific War, documentaries on television, articles in newspapers. Never mentioned dragon rifles. Always talked about flamethrowers as specialized weapons operated by dedicated soldiers. Sullivan wondered if other operators saw same discrepancy, wondered if they also sat in quiet apartments thinking about secret they'd kept for decades, wondered if any of them talked despite classification. Probably not. Most operators were like Sullivan, good at following orders, better at staying silent. Sullivan retired 1979, 57 years old. Pension adequate. Savings modest but sufficient. Retirement stretched ahead like empty terrain. He'd imagined retirement would be relaxing, discovered it was actually boring. Too much time to think, too much quiet for memories to fill. Started doing crossword puzzles, read more books, volunteered at local library shelving returns. Small ways to fill hours. Small ways to stay occupied enough that memories couldn't completely take over. One day in 1983, Sullivan saw a newspaper article. Small piece. Back pages. Headline, Classified WW2 Documents Declassified. Article mentioned systematic review of aging military documents. Various weapons programs and tactical systems classified during war now being released after 38 years. Names were listed, among them, M1E1 Auxiliary Flame Projector. Dragon rifles were declassified. Sullivan read article 3 times. Felt strange. Weapon he'd carried for 5 months. Weapon that had defined his war experience. Weapon he'd never been allowed to discuss. Now officially okay to talk about, except Sullivan still didn't talk about it. Classification lifted. But silence had become habit. Habit had become protection. Some weights you carry so long they become part of your skeleton. Removing them would mean relearning how to stand. Sullivan cut out article. Put it in lockbox with notebook and metal. Evidence that weapon had been real. That his memories weren't invented. That silence had been required, not chosen. Though eventually chosen became requirement, became permanent. Sullivan died March 1998, 76 years old, heart attack, collapsed at home. Neighbor found him next day. His obituary ran in Boston Globe. 2 paragraphs. Robert Sullivan, retired Navy Yard Inspector, Marine Corps veteran, Pacific Theater, survived by nephew Thomas Sullivan and niece Patricia Sullivan Morrison. Services private, in lieu of flowers donations to Marine Corps League. Obituary mentioned honorable discharge. Nothing about dragon rifles. Nobody knew to ask. The lockbox went to nephew Thomas. Put it in his attic unopened. Still there. Memory boxed and stored and forgotten. That was Sullivan's legacy. Quiet, unspoken, classified for 38 years, then voluntarily silent for 15 more. But there were 4,200 dragon rifle operators, all with similar stories, all bound by classification orders that became personal reluctance, that became permanent silence. Frank Hayes returned to Savannah, Georgia, taught high school shop class for 34 years, taught 3 generations of students metalworking, welding proper, tool safety. In his classroom hung one photograph. His fire team on Peleliu, 4 young Marines squinting at camera, weapons slung casually. Could have been any training photo from any war. Students asked about it sometimes. Hayes gave same answer, just some boys I served with. One student in 1987, persistent kid, smart, heading to Georgia Tech engineering program, kept pushing. Mr. Hayes, what weapon is that in the picture? Looks like M1 Garand, but there's something extra on it. Hayes looked at photo, really looked. First time in years. Could see dragon rifle clear as day if you knew what to look for. Projection nozzle under barrel, fuel cylinder barely visible. Just standard infantry rifle, Hayes said. Light plane tricks. You sure my grandfather was in the Pacific? Says he never saw anything like that. Hayes smiled, kind smile, teacher smile. Your grandfather probably right. Marines carried lots of experimental equipment. Most of it didn't work out. Best we forget the failures and remember the things that mattered. Student accepted answer, went to Georgia Tech, became engineer, probably never thought about conversation again. Hayes kept thinking about it, realized he'd been given perfect opportunity to break silence about weapon that had defined his war. Weapon he'd helped perfect. Weapon he'd trained dozens of operators to use. And he'd said nothing. Classification was lifted. He could have explained, could have told truth, could have made student understand what innovation looked like, what tactical revolution felt like, what carrying fire cost. But Hayes said nothing, because silence was easier. Because some truths were too complicated for casual classroom conversation. Because he'd carried weight so long that speaking felt heavier than staying quiet. Hayes died 2004, 83 years old. His family donated his service records to Marine Corps Historical Center. Researchers can access them. Nobody has. Just another veteran's papers in archives full of veteran papers. Jack Morrison promoted to major after Iwo Jima served in Korea. Commanded Rifle Company saw Dragon rifle equivalent being tested in Korean cave warfare. Weapon didn't work as well in different terrain. Project abandoned. Morrison retired as Lieutenant Colonel 1964, 3 wars. 32 years service, multiple decorations, respected officer, Marine Corps History Division did oral history interview 1989. Standard practice for senior officers. Preserve institutional knowledge. Document experiences. Interview lasted 4 hours. Covered Morrison's entire career. Training at West Point, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Korea, Cold War assignments. Post-war doctrine development. Interviewer young captain asked about experimental weapons on Peleliu. Morrison paused, long pause. Interviewer waited. We had access to some specialized equipment I'm not at liberty to discuss. It was effective. Can you elaborate? No. Is it still classified? Technically, no. Personally, yes. Interviewer didn't push. Some things were clearly off limits. Morrison's tone made that clear. Morrison's complete oral history runs 127 pages. Dragon rifles mentioned once obliquely in those 7 words. 72 bursts of flame erased into one careful sentence. After interview, captain thanked Morrison, shook hands, said interview would be valuable for historians. Morrison smiled polite smile. Just make sure you include the things that actually matter. The boys who served, the ones who didn't come home, that's the only history worth preserving. Captain nodded, didn't understand Morrison wasn't talking about what was said. Was talking about what couldn't be said, about operators who died silent, about effectiveness measured in lives saved and costs paid and memories carried until death. Morrison died 2003, never violated classification oath, never spoke publicly about weapon that changed Pacific warfare, took weight to grave like Sullivan, like Hayes, like thousands of others. Dr. Harold Jensen, civilian engineer at Edgewood Arsenal, continued flame weapon development through 1967, worked on improved flamethrowers, napalm refinement, other classified projects, published 14 technical papers on combustion engineering. None mentioned Dragon rifles, talked about fuel chemistry, ignition systems, pressure dynamics, all the science without any of the application. One paper in 1961 came close, titled Distributed Lethality, Theoretical Framework for Democratizing Specialized Military Capabilities. Abstract discussed concept of giving every infantry soldier capabilities previously restricted to specialists. Used examples like rifle-mounted grenade launchers and squad automatic weapons. Never mentioned Dragon rifles specifically, but paper was clearly inspired by them. Anyone who knew could see it, but almost nobody knew. Paper was published in obscure military engineering journal, read by maybe 200 people, cited by 3 subsequent papers, then forgotten. Jensen died 1994, left behind notebooks and technical drawings that remain classified to this day. Some things stay secret even after declassification. Engineering specifications for M1E1 auxiliary flame projector exist in some government archive. Locked away, forgotten. Of the 4,200 Dragon rifles deployed in combat, none returned to the United States. Marines turned them in per orders. Most were destroyed, cut apart with torches, disposed as scrap metal. Symbolic and practical. Remove evidence. Eliminate memory. 3 units survived, manufactured specifically for historical preservation. Never saw combat. National Museum of the Marine Corps at Quantico has one. Display case labeled Experimental Infantry Weapons 1942 to 1945. 3 weapons total. Dragon rifle sits between experimental night vision scope and acoustic detection device. No explanation, no context, no placard describing what it did or why it mattered. Just metal and wood and canvas straps behind glass. Museum curator in 2015 tried to create better documentation. Researched Dragon rifle. Found declassified documents. Found production records. Found after-action reports. Tried to find veterans. Posted notices in Marine Corps publications. Contacted veteran organizations. Searched for operators. Found none willing to talk. Some were dead. Others didn't respond. Few who responded said same thing. I don't discuss that weapon. Curator eventually gave up. Wrote basic placard, M1E1 flame projector. Experimental weapon system tested in Pacific Theater, 1944 to 1945. Combined standard rifle with auxiliary flame capability. Limited production and deployment. True, incomplete, safe. U.S. Army Ordnance Museum at Aberdeen. Proving Ground has another Dragon rifle. Similar display, similar lack of context. Weapon sits encased with other experimental systems from same era. Most visitors walk past without noticing. Smithsonian National Museum of American History holds third in storage collections, never displayed publicly. Accessioned as M1E1 flame projector, circa 1944. Catalog notes mention chemical warfare service development, nothing about combat employment, nothing about 4,000 operators, nothing about effectiveness or cost. Museum researcher in 2008 proposed Dragon rifle exhibit, part of larger exhibition on military innovation. Wanted to showcase how warfare evolves through technological adaptation. Proposal got rejected. Committee decided Dragon rifle was too controversial and insufficient public interest. Real reason nobody wanted to explain to visitors how United States equipped every infantry squad with ability to burn people alive and then classified entire program for almost 4 decades. Easier to keep it in storage. Let it gather dust. Pretend it never happened. 3 physical artifacts, 4,200 veterans bound to silence. Classified secret for 38 years. Voluntarily silent for decades after. Why official explanation in 1945, tactical surprise preservation, diplomatic considerations, operational security. Real reasons were more complicated. May 15, 1945. Washington, D.C. War Department. Colonel Thomas Henderson, Chemical Warfare Service Liaison to Secretary of War, submitted classified memorandum. Subject M1E1 Auxiliary Flame Projector. Post-war classification recommendations. Henderson wrote, M1E1 program represents significant tactical innovation. However, several factors recommend continued classification after hostilities cease. First, international law regarding flame weapons remains ambiguous. While not explicitly prohibited by Geneva Conventions, flame weapons occupy moral gray area. Widespread publicity of rifle-mounted flame projectors could complicate post-war diplomatic relations, particularly regarding war crimes, tribunals, and occupation policy. Second, weapon effectiveness derives partially from enemy inability to identify operators. Public disclosure of technical specifications eliminates tactical surprise for potential future conflicts. Soviet Union and other potential adversaries would develop countermeasures if aware of capability. Third, detailed documentation of burn casualties and operational employment could provide material for enemy propaganda regarding American conduct of war. Japanese already claiming American brutality. Dragon rifle publicity would substantiate claims. Fourth, program demonstrates American willingness to pursue any tactical advantage, regardless of moral considerations. This revelation could complicate post-war positioning as moral authority and democratic standard bearer. Better to classify and forget. Recommendation: maintain secret classification for minimum 25 years. Destroy all Dragon rifles except museum samples. Remove references from official unit histories. Restrict veteran discussion through continued classification orders. The memorandum went up the chain. Secretary of War Henry Stimson read it June 2, 1945. Approved June 3rd. Dragon rifles would be classified secret, would remain classified until systematic review in 1983. But classification was only part of silence. August 16, 1945. Marine Corps Equipment Command issued orders. All M1E1 auxiliary flame projectors will be turned in immediately for storage or destruction. Operators will sign non-disclosure agreements. Discussion of weapon system remains classified, secret per War Department directive. 4,200 operators signed agreements. Promised not to discuss weapon system employment methods, combat results. Violation would result in court-martial fines, imprisonment. Most operators signed without hesitation. Weren't planning to discuss it anyway. What would they say? How would they explain? Some operators felt relief. Classification gave them excuse for silence. They wanted anyway. Couldn't talk about Dragon rifles because orders said so. Not because memories were too heavy, or guilt too complicated, or moral calculus too unresolved. Classification became permission to stay silent about things they wanted silent anyway. Sullivan signed, Hayes signed, Morrison signed, Anderson signed. 4,200 signatures, 4,200 agreements to forget officially what they'd remember personally forever. The weapons went away. The memories didn't. Between November 1944 and August 1945, Dragon rifles cleared an estimated 2,847 fortified positions across Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Estimated enemy casualties, 8,000 to 11,000. These numbers represent positions that previously required extensive support assets and resulted in significantly higher Marine casualties. Marine infantry units equipped with Dragon rifles suffered 11% casualty rates in cave warfare operations. Units without Dragon rifles suffered 19% casualty rates. That 8% difference represents approximately 1,200 Marines who survived the Pacific War instead of dying in cave assaults. 1,200 fathers who saw children born. 1,200 men who built houses, started businesses, taught school, lived full lives because compact flame projector gave them tactical options that previously didn't exist. That's the cold mathematics. The warm truth is more complicated. Those 1,200 survivors included men like Sullivan, who never fully came home despite physically returning. Men who lived with nightmares. Men who avoided fire for the rest of their lives. Men who saved their friends by burning strangers and carried that weight until death. Was it worth it? Do the 1,200 saved lives justify psychological cost to 4,200 operators? Do ends justify means when means involve burning people alive with industrial efficiency? These questions have no comfortable answers. Just competing calculations about whose suffering matters more and under what circumstances, and whether survival justifies everything or nothing or something in between. In 1983, systematic declassification review reached Dragon rifle documents. 38-year classification lifted. Program moved from secret to unclassified. No press release. No announcement. Just paperwork filed in National Archives. Available to researchers who knew what to look for and cared enough to look. Few did. World War II was ancient history by 1983. Veterans were elderly or dead. Public attention focused elsewhere. Dragon rifles remained obscure despite declassification. Several military historians expressed surprise when they discovered weapons' existence. Marine Corps had never publicly acknowledged it. No war correspondents photographed it in action. Most operations occurred in small unit engagements that attracted little press coverage. Weapon had been deliberately erased from official history. Declassification restored documents, but couldn't restore memory or recognition or public understanding. One historian in 1987 tried writing an article about Dragon rifles, contacted veteran organizations, found several operators willing to confirm they'd used weapon, none willing to discuss in detail. Typical response: yes, I operated that weapon system. No, I don't wish to elaborate. Please respect my privacy. Historian eventually abandoned project. Couldn't write comprehensive article with no first-hand accounts. Couldn't understand weapons impact without operator perspective. Published short piece in Military History Journal. Focused on technical specifications and production numbers. Mentioned combat employment briefly. No human element. No cost assessment. No moral complexity. Article was read by maybe 500 people. Cited by 2 subsequent papers. then forgotten again. Dragon rifles remained obscure, not because of classification anymore, because of voluntary silence that outlasted official secrecy. In 2008, U.S. Army experimented with rifle-mounted incendiary devices for urban combat in Iraq. Concepts similar to Dragon Rifle give every infantry squad organic flame capability for clearing fortified buildings. Development halted after preliminary testing. Concerns about international law, public perception, diplomatic complications. Same issues that classified Dragon rifles in 1945. History repeating, same tactical logic, same moral questions, same decision to abandon rather than confront. Some technologies are too effective for comfort. Some capabilities raise questions. Military organizations prefer not to answer publicly. Project Officer in 2008 found declassified Dragon rifle documents during research. Read after-action reports. Saw effectiveness. Saw casualty reduction. Saw tactical revolution. Also found Henderson's 1945 memo recommending classification. Diplomatic complications. Moral gray areas. Propaganda concerns. Realized same concerns applied in 2008. Iraq War was already controversial. American brutality claims were constant. Rifle-mounted incendiary devices would provide perfect propaganda material. Better to classify. Forget. Pretend it never happened. Again, some lessons get learned, some get deliberately forgotten, some get classified and buried, and rediscovered and buried again. Dragon rifles were real. 4,200 operators were real. 2,847 cleared positions were real. 8,000 to 11,000 enemy casualties were real. 1,200 American lives saved were real. So all of it happened, none of it was discussed. That's the legacy. Robert Sullivan died 1998, never having spoken publicly about Dragon rifles. Frank Hayes died 2004, never having explained what weapon he carried. Jack Morrison died 2003, never having elaborated beyond 7 careful words. They honored classification oaths. They kept the secret. They carried memories silently until death released them from obligation. The last known Dragon rifle operator died in January 2019, name withheld at family request. He was 94 years old, had never told his children what weapon he carried, never explained his nightmares, never violated classification even decades after it was lifted. His daughter found old photograph after his death. Her father as young Marine, standing with 3 other soldiers, holding rifle with something attached underneath barrel. She posted photo on social media, asked if anyone knew what the attachment was. Got hundreds of responses. Most said probably just weird angle or shadow. Few suggested maybe experimental weapon system. One response came from a retired Marine Corps historian. Said that's M1 IE-1 flame projector. Dragon rifle, used in Pacific 1944 to 1945. Your father was one of maybe 4,200 operators. Daughter didn't know what that meant. Googled Dragon rifle, found brief Wikipedia entry. Few hundred words, technical specifications, production numbers, combat employment mentioned briefly, nothing about peeing, nothing about screaming, nothing about carrying fire, nothing about silence. Daughter tried to learn more, contacted Marine Corps, got referred to Historical Center, got told records were sparse. Most operators had died. Few had ever discussed it. She eventually gave up, accepted that her father had carried secret to grave. Some weights are too personal to share. Some silences are choices, not impositions. Now they're all gone. Every operator. Every man who fired those weapons and lived with what fire accomplished. All dead. All silent. All beyond questioning. What remains? 3 museum pieces gathering dust. Declassified documents in archives. After-action reports with clinical descriptions of positions cleared and casualties inflicted. Technical specifications measuring lethality in ounces and yards. And notebooks, maybe, locked away in attics and closets and storage units. Private records of public events, measurements and observations, and occasional moments of honest reflection about what it meant to be efficient at terrible things. Sullivan's notebook is probably still in his nephew's attic in Boston. Lockbox unopened. Memory preserved but unread. If nephew ever looks inside, he'll find pages of careful handwriting, documenting cave warfare mathematics, numbers recording effectiveness. Final entry dated March 16, 1945. Mission accomplished. Costs still calculating. Sullivan never finished that calculation. Maybe couldn't be finished. Maybe some costs exceed accounting systems humans possess. The Dragon rifles are gone. The operators are gone. The war is gone. What persists questions without comfortable answers. Recognition that tactical effectiveness and moral cost aren't opposites, but companions. Understanding that wars are won through innovations that survivors spend lifetimes trying to forget. American industrial capacity in World War II produced aircraft carriers and atomic bombs, and M1 Garand rifles and Dragon rifles. Produced enough of everything to overwhelm enemies through sheer material advantage. That capacity won the war. Also created weapons too psychologically expensive for men who use them. Dragon rifles represent that paradox perfectly. Tactically decisive, operationally efficient, psychologically devastating. Classified for 38 years because acknowledging existence meant acknowledging what Americans were willing to do to win, burning people alive with precision and efficiency and distributed capability across entire infantry divisions. That's what Dragon rifles enabled. That's what 4,200 Marines did. That's what saved 1,200 American lives and ended 8,000 to 11,000 enemy lives and scarred however many operator lives in ways unmeasurable. All true, all complicated, all deliberately forgotten until classified documents crept into archives and historians with time and interest reconstructed what had been erased. This is their story. The men who carried 8 extra pounds of fuel and fire and moral weight. The men who saved their friends by burning strangers. The men who became excellent at something horrible and lived quietly afterward with excellence's cost. They asked for nothing except to complete their mission and go home. They received recognition and classified citations nobody read, and bronze stars stored in lockboxes and nightmares that lasted 50 years. They changed infantry warfare, made specialized capability ordinary, distributed lethality to lowest tactical level, proved that innovation mattered more than tradition and that effectiveness could be measured in saved American lives regardless of methods employed. Then they went silent, honored their oaths, kept their secrets, carried their weights without complaint or explanation. Robert Sullivan, Frank Hayes, Jack Morrison, Mike Anderson, 196 others whose names appear in no memorials. Average age 22 when they operated Dragon rifles. Carried them through coral hell and volcanic nightmare and cave warfare that defied conventional solutions. They survived by being good at burning people. They came home by being silent about it. They died having protected secret better than any classification order could enforce. This story honors their silence by breaking it carefully, by acknowledging both their effectiveness and their cost, by refusing to celebrate or condemn, but simply to document what happened when American engineering met tactical necessity and produced weapons so efficient they had to be forgotten. The Dragon rifles are gone. The fire is extinguished. The operators rest. Their legacy remains. Quiet, complicated, classified for 38 years and obscure for 40 more after that. But real, always real. They carried fire. They saved lives. They paid prices that calculation systems cannot measure. They deserve to be remembered even though they preferred silence, especially because they preferred silence. That might be the most important part of all.